I'm talking with Professor Doug Tallamy, an entomology professor at the University of Delaware. And Doug, you have pointed out to us the importance of gardening for nature, and give us the statistic that really drives home why we've got to be so critically enthusiastic about doing this.
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of statistics. The one that people talk about is the loss of our birds. We've lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of our North American bird population already gone. But we've got global insect decline. The last figure I saw is we've lost 75% of our insects. The little things that run the world, not good. So pretty much everything's in decline.
And one of the things that, when I've been following you for years, and one of the first things you talked about was larval food sources, because even I think a hummingbird, everything's, they just eat sugar water. But don't most birds have to feed their young sources of protein?
Absolutely. 96% of our terrestrial birds rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. And that includes hummingbirds. When they're breeding, 80% of their diet is insects. It's not sugar water. You need protein to make a body. That's right. And it's not just any insect. It is those caterpillars. They're soft. They're high in protein and fats. They're high in carotenoids, which vertebrates can't make. So it's a great source of carotenoids for the birds. Well, they have very thin exoskeleton.
Yeah, who would want to have stuff a roach down the baby's mouth?
Or a beetle. A beetle is. Yeah. I talk about caterpillars being like sausages.
Yeah.
Well, a beetle's like a tank, and so much of a beetle is undigestible, and it's got sharp edges. It rips up the baby's mouth. So caterpillars are enormously important, and not just a few, thousands. 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest.
Whoa.
And after they leave the nest, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days. So you're talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars.
For one little tiny nest. Little nest of a small bird. Yeah, a small bird. Yeah. And then the other thing is that because of coevolution, most caterpillars can't have only certain plants which their larvae can digest. Is that correct?
That is correct, but it's called host plant specialization.
Yes.
And a perfect example is the monarch. It only eats milkweeds. But 90% of our caterpillars are host plant specialists, just like the monarchs. And they have to specialize because the plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they protect their tissues with nasty chemicals. Yeah, they don't taste good.
And then some like the monarchs learn to get around that.
That's where that coevolution comes along. They get specialized enzymes and behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that allow them to get past those defenses on milkweeds. But they didn't do that for any other plant. So then they're locked into eating milkweeds. Yeah. And if you take milkweeds out of your yard and put hostas in, there go your monarchs.
But fortunately, we have some plants that are easy to grow that also support a huge number of caterpillars. And I guess the mighty oak.
The mighty oak is the best. It's the best across the nation. They support more than 950 species of caterpillars. No other plant genus comes close to that. So if you're going to plant a single tree, if you're going to do one thing to your yard that's going to help biodiversity, plant an oak.
And then also, people do all this crazy volcano mulching and stuff like that. But the caterpillars, the majority of them, I believe, fall to the ground, and they need to go into the ground. So you really should have a huge mulched area that allows them to, and they're not coming down there to bother you. As soon as they land, they want to go down into the soil.
Right. They pupate. You've got egg, larva, pupa, and then adult, and they go underground to pupate, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter. But we don't have leaf litter under our trees. We have grass that goes right up to it, so it's very difficult for those caterpillars to get down there. So we've got to do two things. We've got to make caterpillars, but we also have to shrink the lawn.
Yes.
We've got 44 million acres of lawn, which is an area the size of New England.
I don't believe that lawns do anything for the caterpillars or the birds, if I'm not mistaken.
Lawns don't do anything for anything. They're pretty. There's 4 things every landscape has to do. It has to support the watershed. It has to support pollinators. It has to support the food web, those caterpillars. And it has to sequester carbon, pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Lawn does none of those things. So having less lawn is going to help all aspects of our ecosystem. And a good way to have the less lawn is to put that bed under your oak tree because the beds, make it right out to the drip line.
Yeah.
That's what the caterpillars want. That's what the tree wants. And you'll have less lawn.
And then around the edges of our property, where if you just have lawn, any pesticides or fertilizers might get down into the watershed, we can use the edges of our lawn also to plant perhaps smaller trees and have some little patches of perennials, herbaceous perennials. Or
the more plants you have on your property, the more pollutants are going to be intercepted before they get into the watershed. But remember, we don't need any pesticides. We use pesticides pretty much for no reason. The only ones that really are necessary are to control termites. And real termite people use baits now.
And you have clever ways of trying to reduce your mosquito population. You get a water bucket and put some straw or hay in it, and then some mosquito ducks. And so if you've got an easy place for the female mosquitoes, the mosquito ducks are specific only to the mosquito larvae.
Only to aquatic diptera, but the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is a mosquito larva. And it's there because you've created this irresistible brew. The female can't help but lay her eggs in there.
Yeah.
So you draw them from your property, they lay their eggs there, put in one mosquito dunk, and
they last for a long time.
You're done, yeah.
And
$12 for a season's worth of control.
How about that? And then the other thing we can do is fire ants are such a problem down here. And Clemson has wonderful resources on how to control those. A lot of people still come down and put pesticide over their entire yards. There's one thing that is, although it's not organic, it's a bait, and you just put like a pound for a whole acre. And then there are also some organic alternatives.
They will take it back to the colony.
Yeah, I know. We've really... People are working hard to find ways to try to be a part of the solution, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
When we spread pesticides and herbicides all over our living spaces, we're living in that. We've created an envelope of poison. And no, we don't die tomorrow, but 30 years from now we get cancer. Where did that come from?
And tell me about what would happen if we did not have the decomposing insects.
90% of the organic material out there dies and falls to the ground. It's our decomposing decomposers that turn that over. If we didn't have that, E.O. Wilson says that the earth would rot. All we would have is bacteria and fungi. It would take forever. It'd be this tangled mass of rotting vegetation very slowly. But the insects are turning it over very quickly. So insects are essential for life on Earth, life as we know it. And without insects, humans would disappear. This is an important point. So this war we have against insects is a war against ourselves.
Also, I think that we need sometimes to provide water sources. Where you're from, you probably have to put water that's not frozen in the winter. But down here, birds do need water.
Yeah, having a moving water source. So I have a friend calls it a bubbler, but even just a dripping hose, because birds are attracted to clean water. The old bird bath that just sat there and got stagnant, they don't like that. But if you have a little pump that circulates it, it signifies clean water. And particularly for migrating birds, they fly up to 300 miles a night. They've got to come down and have a big drink. And
when you talk about that we are nature's best hope, you have now a movement that I believe you said 75% of the land in North America is...
78% of the lower 48 states is privately owned. 85% east of the Mississippi. So if we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, and failure is not an option. So yes, we have something called Homegrown National Park, right? Yeah. We need to enlist everybody, millions of property owners who are going to practice good earth stewardship right at home. That will turn this around. It really will. And there's enough people who have done it, including myself. I see what happened at our property. Nature's really resilient. If you put the right plants there, it rebuilds itself, and we can increase biodiversity very quickly.
As we move towards smaller yards now, some people think, well, I can't do anything. But I believe you've talked about people who have teeny little properties, and they plant natives, and then they go out and start looking at the different caterpillars they have. It's kind of astonishing.
Yeah. Small properties work. If you have no property, if you have a balcony on an apartment complex, container plants with native plants. And you can now go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and there's a whole list of the appropriate native plants that do well in containers in different ecoregions.
Yes.
So there's no reason. That's a pile of bricks with no plant material there. If everybody had plants on their balconies, it's all of a sudden an important resource for the migrating monarch, for the native bees that are nearby. We can do it everywhere, cities included.
You'll laugh at me, but we live in a house that was built in 1880, and we don't have central heat or air. And if we did not have oak trees and pecan trees in our yard, let me tell you, we could not survive in South Carolina.
Yeah. Those big trees throw shade. It'll lower the temperature 10 to 15 degrees in the summertime, and it protects you from winter winds.
There's just, for every single purpose, this makes great sense. And it's not going to be that difficult, is it?
No, it's not. It's fun. You can see the results, and it's not that difficult. And if you don't garden, and a lot of people don't, we're trying to build an industry of ecological landscapers that you can hire, and they'll come do it for you. But not doing it in the future is not an option. We can't live without nature, because that creates the life support that we depend on. We call them ecosystem services, and we need them everywhere, not just in parks and preserves. So this is kind of a must-do movement that will involve gardeners, but even if you don't garden, the people you hire can do it.
I want to thank you so much for sharing this information with our audience, and for helping us all to understand that we as an individual can make a difference.
You are nature's best hope. Thanks for the opportunity.